Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the presentation about participant observation, a study on code switching in ESL teachers from an international school in Venezuela. Now, let's begin with the statement of the problem. The background is the country's level in EFL and ESL, English as a foreign language and English as a secondary language. As we all know, Venezuela has English as a foreign language as the official way or method in which the English language is taught in our country. However, there are a few schools, probably more than a dozen schools that have English as a secondary language as a part of their program. The situation is how these teachers that are part of these programs use languages during their work. Languages said in plural because the participants in this study speak more than one language. And the justification, well, it's centered around the fact that this addresses a topic that has little to no attention in our country, and it would be very much interesting to conduct research on this, and perhaps this could encourage other research studies about this, and perhaps bring more light into this and see the benefits of increasing the level of English taught in our country. Moving on to the research questions, we have set 3 questions or research questions. So number 1, how can code switching, language switching, and language mixing be observed in ESL teachers in Venezuela? Number 2 is, in what moments are these 3 performed by the aforementioned teachers? And lastly, in what specific situations are these done? Now, the objectives obviously are based upon these. The first one being observe code switching, language switching, and language mixing in ESL teachers. Number 2, identify in which moments they perform these types of language alternations. And lastly, describe situations or the situations in which these 3 occur. Now, moving on to the theoretical framework, we begin by stating how this study is presented as an ethnographic observation approach to a very specific phenomenon, framed within the sociology of language, a concept coined by Hernandez Campoy in his work from 2016. Another important concept is the ethnographic approach and how it focuses on ways of speaking or interacting in the speech community, encompassing how language is used in interactions, as well as describing the social construction of those interactions. This concept, coined by Horvath under work from 2013. The ethnographic approach is quite important and essential to this research. Now, let's take a look at code switching, language switching, and language mixing, presented there as a question because the 3 of them seem to be quite confusing, understanding which one is which. So if we take Team's definition, code switching is the preemptively bilingual mode of communication that is characterized by frequent shifts from one language to another, without any type of phonological interference and throughout the flow of a natural conversation. If you're having a conversation with someone else and perhaps there is one phrase or one word in Spanish and it's seen as completely normal, the communication is not interrupted. Then we have language switching, which is the omnipresent behavior that characterizes bilingual individuals and communities, and the process occurs when bilinguals alternate between 2 languages while talking to others. So it would be this one would be seen, language switching, more from the point of view of one full conversation changing into another one altogether, whereas the previous one is seen as the whole phenomenon, how in one conversation one part of it might be in English and then another segment goes into Spanish and then goes back into English, and so on and so forth. So code switching in a more general way, language switching a little bit more specific, and now we move on to language mixing, which is understood as the seemingly indiscriminate use of 2 languages or more in a conversation, implying sort of the existence of a code that uses both of them. This would be more two people having a conversation in which within even one single phrase there are elements of two or more languages. The other person understands it perfectly well and responds in a similar code. That would be language mixing. So understanding these three concepts, now we can move on to the method. Now the method used was participant observation, a method that is very popular in the field of anthropology, considering that it was first used by anthropologists, by Malinowski, in the year 1922. So this has more than 100 years of existence. We have also Margaret Mead and Claude Lévi-Strauss. These three anthropologists sort of gave the foundations for this method, in which the researcher would go onto a distant place and live with a community for 1 decade or even more than a decade and learn everything about their culture, about their customs and traditions, sort of assimilating into the tribe, into the social group, being accepted by them and participating in the things that they do, hence the term participant observation. Of course, nowadays, this method doesn't have to be done in a remote island with a remote society, and you don't have to spend 10,000 hours with them or 10 years or 20 years with them. No, this method can be applied from the commodities of your own environment. You can go to a community that is close to you, that you might even be a part of, and do shorter studies and apply this method. And it actually yields excellent results, not only in the field of anthropology, but also in the field of sociolinguistics. Now, it's important for the researcher that is using this method to be aware of the things that are happening in their surroundings and taking notes about everything, and also notifying the possible participants. In this case, we notified the participants, they accepted, they consented, and that's why this method was used. Now, like I said before, the participants were notified, they knew what the project was going to be about, and they accepted to this method. I was going to be part of the conversations like usual, and I was going to take some notes here and there, and they were supposed to ignore when I did it, which actually they did very well. They cooperated excellently well. Now, the participants are the ESL teachers from Colegio Integral del Ávila, and these are 13 participants with a great array of language mastery. 5 teachers speak fluently English, French, and Spanish. 1 teacher speaks English, German, and Spanish. 1 teacher speaks English, German, Italian, and Spanish. And 1 teacher speaks 5 languages. All of the participants have similar geographical backgrounds. The average age is 41 years old, with 1 teacher being 74 and 1 being only 23 years old. In the category of gender, we have 9 participants who are women, and the rest of them are men. Now, moving on to the results, we see that the way in which the participants perform code switching, language switching, or language mixing depends mostly on the presence of students, considering that the rule of the school is that if there are students nearby, the teachers are not allowed to speak any other language that isn't English. When the students are not in the vicinity, for example, if they're inside of the office, or if they are after hours, or if all of the students are in class and the teachers are in perhaps a teacher's lounge or the staff table, they sometimes would perform code switching, language switching, or language mixing, depending on certain aspects, mostly about personal choice. We have examples such as this conversation, in which we can see the degrees, a very important degree of language mixing. The conversation is done between 3 people, and they use Spanish and English without any kind of issue. They mix them, and they all understand each other and respond in similar ways, and it doesn't interrupt the natural flow of the conversation. This is only one example among many other possible examples that are in the study. To conclude, code switching, language switching, and language mixing have been linked in this research to familiar connotations when the teachers are in familiarity, when they are more in intimacy and they feel comfortable, and students are not around, they will use either of these three modalities of language alternation. And these are inevitable in a multilingual context. Even though the teachers have a specific rule, they will still try to use both languages, depending on the case. Another conclusion is that participant observation yields excellent results as a method in the field of sociolinguistics, understanding language and how a social group behaves. And as a final reflection, it's important to encourage more studies like this. This one represents a very small fraction of the reality of EFL and ESL teaching in Venezuela. But hopefully, if more research is done about this topic, more encouragement will arise, not only for studies, but also to perhaps increase the level, not only in the private sector, which is the one in which this study is framed, but also in the public sector. Thank you very much for your attention. Here are the references, and see you next time.